Every night at the gas station, he comes back for one more cigarette. The cigarette flared like a tiny sun in the empty dark. It hung alone in the night air near Pump 3, a perfect orange dot that did not belong to any living person. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway of the 24-hour gas station, light from the store spilling over his sneakers, and watched the little ember glow and then go out. Then it flicked on again, like someone breathing into a small coal. For a long second Marcus could not move. The lot was quiet except for the hum of the neon open sign and the soft buzz of the streetlight. It smelled like rain on hot asphalt and something older, like the inside of an attic where boxes had been left for years. The cigarette kept burning at Pump 3. No car was there. No shadow moved. The pump's light blinked. The pump was not plugged into a hose. Marcus felt his phone in his pocket, heavy and useless. Normally at 3 in the morning he would just call the police and tell them he was closing early. But for 3 weeks now, he had learned how these nights bent the rules. He had learned that some things you could not fix with a number, and the police could only make reports. They could not explain a man who came back every night to stand at Pump 3 and light the same cigarette. The light went out for good and the night went a little colder. Marcus stepped outside because he could not do anything else. His breath fogged and the bell above the door chimed like an apology. There was no one to speak to except the dark. He had seen the man before. Everyone who worked the night shift at the station had seen him. He was an ordinary man in a way that made him more frightening. Brown jacket, cheap boots, a face like every face you pass on a sidewalk. He never crossed the lot. He never walked to the store. He stood by the pump, lit a cigarette, and smoked until the ember went out. Then, like clockwork, at 2:13 a.m., he left and the lot emptied as if nothing had been there at all. But tonight was different. Tonight the cigarette relit on its own. The ember flared and hung again in the dark, as steady as a heartbeat. Marcus felt something press against his sternum, tiny and cold. It was not fear. It was the feeling you get when someone suddenly remembers a name they forgot long ago. A pressure, a small, sharp note that vibrates and will not stop until it is answered. Marcus stepped closer to Pump 3. He could see the metal and the numbers and the faded stickers. Graffiti looped across the concrete curb like a low-tide line of names. The cigarette was a dot in the dark, but the smoke that rose from it curled and held its shape too long, like ribbons frozen in a breeze. Marcus did the thing he had done 3 weeks ago. He reached out his hand and, very slowly, dropped his lighter to the asphalt. It bounced, rolled, and came to rest beside the pump. For a second he thought the cigarette would burn out. It did not. The ember shivered and then went bright again. "You don't have to keep coming back," a voice said. Marcus's own voice. It sounded small under the hum of the neon sign. He had said the same sentence the first night he saw the man, a joke to cut the tension, and now he said it like a plea. The cigarette's glow changed. It winked, then brightened as if in answer. The smoke wrote words in the air, letters that were not letters but that Marcus understood. "Come back. One more. Stay." The lot seemed to lean in. The night smelled of old pennies and wet wool. There was no sound of feet. Still, there was the sudden sense of being watched from somewhere far past the streetlight. Marcus felt eyes on the back of his neck, and then the breath, a cold, damp breeze that smelled faintly of tobacco and garage oil. It moved over him like a hand. Then a click, soft and impossible, like someone striking a match in a place where no hand existed. The cigarette flared so bright the light burned spots into Marcus's eyes. He had to close them. When he opened them again, the glow had gone. The lot was as it had been before, the open sign buzzing, the pumps idle, the highway a distant smear of headlights. Except on Pump 3, where the nozzle rested in its cradle, there were fresh footprints in the dust on the concrete. No, not footprint. They were shoe prints that looked like the ones a man named Dean had once worn. Marcus knew them because he had shelled peanuts for Dean once and they had talked about shoes and the way he worked the night shift. Dean had shoes with a flat heel and a nick on the left toe. Those nicks showed in the print. Marcus swallowed. The prince led from the pump toward the highway, and then stopped, as if someone had walked through the air. He stiffened, the knot in his chest tightening. He was an ordinary man who had learned to keep watch. He had learned to keep a little notebook under the counter with the time the cigarette appeared and the exact color of the jacket the man wore. He had learned when to call in sick, when to sleep, and when to tell his mother that the nights had been quieter. But knowledge could not explain the print on the concrete, or the cigarette that relit itself in the dead of night. Something moved behind the store, small, quick, like the rustle of static. Marcus turned. He thought he saw a figure in the reflection of the glass, a shadow that did not match his silhouette. It bent and straightened and then was gone. The bell over the door chimed again, though no one entered. Marcus felt his knees go soft. He picked up the lighter and the pack of cigarettes from behind the counter. The identical brand that the man always used, Kingfisher Reds, a cheap brand with a blue crest. He had put them there the first night to see if the cigarette came for that brand alone. His hands trembled as he crossed the threshold. The lights inside the store hummed and the candy racks cast funny long shadows. He moved toward the window that faced the pumps, and there, in the reflection, he saw the man again. Or he saw the outline of a man. This time the figure was closer, as if it had stepped into the street. It tilted its head like a dog listening. The cigarette was not lit, but the man's hand went to his mouth, as if he were preparing to light one. Marcus opened the door. The cold air lunged in, smelling of oil and distant rain. The man was at pump 3, closer now, the blue jacket a little brighter. Marcus felt his heart thud so hard the sound filled his ears. "You can't keep doing this," Marcus said, voice dry. "You can't keep." The man lifted his head. His face was a map of small lines and long empty spaces, eyes like the hole in a spool. For a second Marcus thought the man might be made of paper, so thin he could fold away. Then the man moved his mouth and words came out like gravel. "I only want one more," the man said. The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was close enough that Marcus felt the breath. Marcus did not move. He had worked nights at small gas stations for 3 years. He had boxed up cold pizza, counted rolled pennies, and watched quiet tragedies walk off the lot. He had never seen a face that could not be chased away. The man reached into his inside jacket pocket with slow care. He brought out a cigarette. Marcus saw the match strike at the same time the cigarette flared into life. The ember glowed, steady. The man drew smoke into his lungs and then exhaled a long plume that formed a tiny, solid shape, like a theater curtain, before it drifted away. He looked at Marcus with eyes that were not eyes, and then he turned as if to leave. His steps were soundless. He moved away from pump 3 and toward the highway. Marcus whispered the first name that came to him. "Dean." His voice was a question that had been living at the bottom of his throat. The man's shoulders shivered like a tree in wind. He did not stop. He shifted his cigarette to the other hand. The night closed over him. Marcus blurred after him. He ran across the lot, shoes slapping concrete, breath hot and broken in his chest. The man crossed the curb where the asphalt met the road, and then he was gone between headlights on the interstate. Marcus reached the empty space, and felt the cold where the man had stood. He turned to call for backup, to call the police, to call his manager, to call his mother, anything to break the lull that followed an impossible thing, but his phone only showed the emergency dial. The battery had died with a single strike. For a minute Marcus stood on the concrete and let the memory of the cigarette glow burn in his mind. It was so small, so simple, a man lighting a cigarette and leaving, and yet it contained a whole atlas of questions. Why did he come back? Why every night? Why one more cigarette? How could a cigarette relight on its own? Marcus thought of the prince and the half-truth of the voice that named him. He thought of all the nights where, while cleaning the dusty back shelf, he had come across a small photograph stuck behind a box of motor oil, a picture of a young man with a crooked smile and a cigarette in his hand. He slid to the curb and sat down because he could not stand anymore. The sky was abruise. The highway hummed like a distant insect. Then he heard something else, soft as a whisper but clear as the bell over the door. The man came back. No car. No footstep. The cigarette appeared again at pump 3, alone and glowing. Marcus did not breathe. The line between the pumps and the highway felt thinner, like tissue paper. He had the sudden, foolish wish that someone would turn on the lights everywhere, flood the whole town in white so you could see the truth like a photo. But the light stayed where it had been, yellow and small. He saw the man's shadow pass and felt his hand on the cooler handle. The man paused, and Marcus imagined him thinking. He thought of someone who had counted to 3, lit a cigarette, and hoped the world would be the same after the smoke. Then the man turned and looked straight at Marcus. For an instant their eyes met. In that instant Marcus saw a name on the man's neck, a tattoo half hidden by the collar. It said Lucas in letters gone soft with time. Marcus knew that name. Lucas Rivera. He had read it last year in the paper when a car had hit a man at the corner of Maple and 3rd. Lucas had been walking home after a late shift at a restaurant. The drivers argued the light had been green. The coroner had said too much alcohol. The story had a headline that slid off people's tongues. Tragic accident. Marcus had read it once and then filed the name away with the rest. Lucas Rivera had been 27. Marcus had never believed that names could call the dead. But now the name sat like a stone in his mouth. The cigarette flashed once more. The man's mouth moved but no sound came out. Instead, the ember flared and cast a tiny halo on the concrete. A slug of memory slid across Marcus's mind, images like broken glass. Lucas at a red light. A cracked windshield. A car door slammed. A small photograph, the same one Marcus had found behind the motor oil, appearing now in his head. Lucas smiling, lighter between his fingers. Marcus's stomach dropped. He remembered the night 3 weeks earlier when a pale woman with tired eyes had come into the store and asked to use the phone. She had said, "He always comes back for one more," and then she had held the receiver wrong like the cord might bite her, and something in her voice had been like a prayer. Marcus had not believed her then. He had thought she was a woman who missed someone who was gone. He had given her coffee and a broken cookie and watched as she left and walked away into a world that would never be the same. He had not known that those two pieces, woman's voice and cigarette at pump 3, would stitch together like a seam. The man at pump 3 lifted his hand and pointed at the store window. Marcus almost laughed at the simple, childish move. He felt foolish, but he walked closer anyway. The man did not move. He did not step off the curb. He raised the cigarette and tapped the ash into his palm. For a moment it looked like any other night. Then the man blacked out. Not with light or with falling, but as if a page in a book had been turned and that page did not have his face printed on it anymore. Marcus reached for the door and the bell chimed a warning he could not read. Inside the store the radios were dead. The cash register blinked. Marcus's hands were cold. He stared at the space where the man had been and expected to find shoes, or a jacket, or a ring on the ground. Instead, there was nothing, except a small scrap of paper tucked under the pump, stuck to concrete by damp. Marcus bent and picked it up. It was a receipt. Faded. From 1 year ago. A gas purchase for $4.23 at 2:12 a.m. The name printed at the bottom in a hand that had been hurried. L. Rivera. Marcus felt the room tilt. A siren cried far away and then stopped, as if someone had changed their mind about who to help. He shoved the receipt into his pocket and stumbled back inside the store, the world spinning like a coin. He turned on every light, snapping the fluorescent bulbs awake until the place hummed like a hive. He took out the security log and flipped through the night. He had written the times in a small block letter, 2:12, 2:13, each night with a brief note. Cigarette relit, Prince. He had taken a photo with his phone the second week, a fuzzy shot of pump 3 and a tiny orange dot. The photo looked like any city photograph, but for the ember that glowed in the dark. Marcus wanted to call the police. He wanted to show them the receipt. He wanted to tell them the name he had seen on the man's neck. But when he dialed, the line connected to a recorded voice that said, "All circuits are busy. Please try again." The phone died again. He slammed it down on the counter like a man who wanted to break the world into sensible pieces. Behind him, the bell chimed as the door opened. Marcus flinched and turned. In the doorway stood a woman with a face like a weathered photograph, thin, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. She held a paper cup in her hand and a small bag. "You saw him?" she asked before Marcus could speak. Her voice was the same he had heard weeks ago, the same that had trembled. She had the same tired hollows under her eyes. Marcus realized with a hitch that he had been meaning to say her name out loud for weeks. He had given her coffee. He had seen her leave. He had not known her name. Her gaze flicked to pump 3 and then back to Marcus. "He comes back for one more every night," she said. She set the cup down on the counter and smoothed her jacket like someone folding a flag. "My son." Marcus's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He swallowed air. "Lucas." He said the name with the small shock of recognition that felt like someone finding a key in a pocket. She nodded. Tears welled up quickly and spilled down her face like the rain that had not yet fallen. "Lucas," she said, and her voice broke. "He was hit by a car. They said it was an accident. They gave him a number and a box and a line in the paper. But every night, every single night, he stands at pump 3 and he lights a cigarette and he looks at the road like he is waiting for someone to come back." Marcus felt his own eyes go hot. He thought of the receipt in his pocket and the print on the concrete and the cigarette that relit itself like a story that would not end. He thought of all the little things people called coincidences. A receipt left, a shop clerk who noticed, a woman who could not get the world to stop rearranging around her grief. "What does he want?" Marcus asked, a question that felt small in the face of a truth he did not know how to hold. "He wants one more," the woman said. She reached into her bag and took out a worn photograph. It was Lucas, sunlight on his face, cigarette between his fingers, grin like an afterthought. He always had one more. He would say, "I'm only staying for one more. Just one more." He loved that cigarette. It was silly. But he loved it. Marcus looked at the picture and felt the world constrict into a single wire. "He comes back every night?" he asked, even though he had seen the proof. The woman nodded again. "Every night." Her fingers were a little white around the photograph. "He comes back for one more cigarette." For a second they stood in the small, humming store like two people who had finally found the same strange place on a map. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a cigarette flared at pump 3 and went out. The neon sign buzzed. The highway kept passing cars that knew nothing about the man who lit a cigarette at 2:12 every morning and then disappeared. Marcus felt the receipt in his pocket pulse like a second heart. He felt old and very tired. He had wanted to be a sentinel, to keep watch, to put himself between the living and the things they did not want to see. But he also wanted answers. The woman reached across the counter and touched his hand. Her touch was warm and real, and after a long moment Marcus felt like he might breathe normally again. "Promise me you'll not leave him alone," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "Promise me you'll be here tomorrow. Watch. Count. Tell me." Marcus wanted to say yes. He did not know if yes meant anything. He thought of the prints that stopped in the air and the cigarette that relit without a hand. He thought of the name on the man's neck, of Lucas Rivera and the small box the coroner had set on a table somewhere. "I'll be here," Marcus said. His voice sounded like someone opening a gate. The woman let out a sound that could have been a laugh or a sob, and then she left. The bell chimed and the door closed. Marcus leaned back against the counter and felt the fluorescent lights hum through him. Outside, pump 3 waited. The night settled and the highway poured on. Marcus flipped the little notebook open and wrote the time at the top of the page, 2:12 a.m. He drew a small cigarette beside it and under that a word. Lucas. Then the cigarette flared again. The ember burned brighter than any cigarette should. Marcus smelled something else in the smoke this time. Tire rubber, engine grease, and something colder, like old cold iron. He looked up and saw the man at pump 3 raise his hand. Only then did the lights on the highway go out all at once, a blackout that ate the cars into darkness. One by one, the street lamps along Main Street winked and died. The neon open sign in the store stuttered. The bell over the door rang, and kept ringing though the door had not moved. Marcus's pen fell from his hand onto the counter. The sound of the bell filled the store like a drum. He looked back at pump 3. The cigarette was still there, burning steadily. The man stood with his back to the highway now, and for the first time Marcus saw that his jacket was wet with something dark that glinted like tar. The man turned slowly. He did not look like a man anymore. He looked like a memory that had been pressed too long and started to crack. His mouth opened and out of it came not smoke but a whisper of names, names Marcus knew and names he did not. They threaded through the air like small knives. The first name he heard was his own. The bell kept ringing. The lights kept dying. Marcus felt something cold wrap around his ankle. He looked down. There, at the edge of the mat, where the dust had been, a small line of wet footprints appeared, leading from the door toward the back room. They were not big. They were like the impression left by a small, wet hand. Marcus tried to speak but no sound came. The cigarette flared so bright his eyes watered. The man at pump 3 lifted his hand and pointed straight at Marcus with careful, gentle motion. "Come back," the man said, and this time the voice was not the voice of a son or a shuffling ghost. It was the voice of someone who had been wronged and would not let the wrong stay hidden. "Come back for one more." The bell stopped ringing and the lights snapped back on as if nothing had happened. The cigarette went out. The footprints faded. The woman's photo sat on the counter, ordinary and helpless. Marcus pressed his palms to his forehead and felt the cold of sweat. Outside, a single car's brakes squealed on the highway and then rolled on. The world resumed its business like a page being turned. Marcus looked at the clock on the wall. It read 2:13 a.m. He looked down at the receipt in his pocket and the photograph on the counter. He felt the small, steady pull that had been tugging at him since the ember first glowed. He had promised to watch. Behind him, in the back room where the boxes of motor oil waited like sleeping animals, there was a soft sound, like a match being struck and then held ready. Marcus turned his head. The door to the back room was open a crack. A sliver of dark moved inside. And then, before he could move or think, the lighter he had dropped earlier on the concrete on pump 3 clicked itself open on the counter, and a small flame came alive. Marcus stared at it.